Good morning, y'all. We are back with another edition of DNVR Rams Live. As always, I am your host, Justin Michael. We're setting the scene for a big-time road trip to Fresno State this weekend. CSU looking to extend its winning streak to 6 games, currently on its longest winning streak since 2014. A lot at stake. The Rams trying to keep their Mountain West Championship hopes alive. Kind of feels like they might be catching Fresno State at the right time here, so I'm going to talk about that. I'm going to give you some insight into the 2024 Bulldogs. It's been a weird year for the program after a really nice stretch over the last 2-3 seasons. We're going to talk about some of the keys. I'm going to play some clips of Jay Norvell talking about the latest injury update. I'm also going to play a clip of him talking about the explosive plays that Caleb Goody is creating for the offense, and some of these skill guys kind of starting to come alive as the season progresses here. A lot to get into in this opening segment. We're going to go down memory lane a little bit, just take a brief little stroll and talk about the Jim McElwain era. If you missed it, it came out yesterday afternoon that Jim McElwain is retiring at the end of the season. He obviously was the head coach at CSU from 2012 through 2014, went 22-16 overall, led CSU to back-to-back bowl seasons for the first time since the late 90s, early 2000s under Sonny Lubick. It was a really fun era, one that is kind of, at this point, surrounded with a lot of hypotheticals. I think whenever it comes up, inevitably people always talk about what if he had stayed longer? What if he was still here? I will say, I think to an extent, people romanticize the era just in terms of what they were doing. It wasn't that dissimilar to the season CSU is having now. When you look back at that 2014 campaign, and Kevin Lytle actually wrote a great piece about this. They only beat 3 teams with winning records. As it's currently going, probably not going to be a ton of wins for CSU in 2024 over squads with winning records, but you can only play the schedule that is ahead of you. Also, I didn't hear all these people whining about the schedules back when the divisions were separated and you could basically get in the West Division with 7 wins every year. And then you look at 2014 in the Mountain Division, Utah State, Air Force, CSU, Boise State, all win 10 games, and it's a 6-win Fresno State team in the championship game. There's no perfect way to do it. You can only play the schedule that you have. The Rams are taking care of business. Shout out to Kyle Griffin in the Toyota chat, a colleague of mine for CSU football back in the day, talking about Coach Mack. He'll always remember being the water boy for that team. One of the things that I'll always remember about Jim McElwain, aside from him calling me anything but my actual name, called me Tulo for like 18 months because I wore a Troy Tulowitzki jersey one time. Then it transitioned to Peyton because, you guessed it, I wore a Peyton Manning jersey once. But he had no need to know who I was. I was an assistant to the director of football operations at the time, Tom Ellers. Basically was given a ton of busy work when I was in there. I did get to learn a lot, which was cool. The assistants, a lot of those position coaches were really gracious with their time, allowed me to kind of sit around with them and watch them, break down film. And I learned a ton about football working for the staff for those couple of years. I don't want it to seem like I was some important person. They could have functioned just fine, whether I was there or not. But for me, it was just such a special opportunity because, I grew up rooting for CSU. I was a lifelong Rams fan. I was a freshman when I began working for the team. And it was just a really unique experience. And funny enough, especially with McElwain retiring this weekend and just the timing of it all, Tim Skipper, who is actually the interim head coach for Fresno State right now, was the main reason that I got hired onto that staff. He was recruiting Jake Bennett at the time, who was my friend in high school, still one of my good friends to this day. And in peak Justin fashion, went up to him at the spring game, bombarded him with a million questions about the direction of CSU football. They told me to show up the first day that I was on campus. I guarantee you they didn't believe that I actually would, but I did, and they gave me the opportunity, and it's a big reason I'm here today. Had so much fun during those 2013, 2014 seasons. Looking back on the McElwain era, I'm sure most of you are well aware of it, but he came over to CSU after winning 2 national championships as an offensive coordinator at Alabama, spent 1 year at Fresno State before that, where he established that relationship with Tim Skipper. Skipper ended up being his associate head coach and the linebackers coach in Fort Collins, was the only position coach that went to Florida with McElwain when he left, also took the strength coach, Mike Kent, at the time. But Skipper had a deep-rooted relationship with McElwain that goes a long way. It's just kind of funny how that works out with him now coaching against CSU this weekend in a big-time matchup. CSU at the time was coming off of 3 straight 3-9 years when McElwain came in, and I think the biggest thing that he deserves credit for is bringing juice to a program that was basically dead in the water. Not only had they gone 3-9 in 3 straight years, but you had the bowl win in 08, but other than that, you also went 3-9 in 07. You went 4-8 in 06. It was one of the more miserable stretches for CSU fans, especially after getting spoiled and being used to what had been established under Sonny Lubick. This wasn't the early 80s anymore. The expectation was not for CSU to be a doormat, and it was just such an ugly stretch for the Rams. Ton of heartbreaking losses along the way. I've talked a ton about the wonky 2007 season and how that record doesn't necessarily indicate the talent level of that team. And I think you saw that with a lot of those same guys coming back in 2008 and making a bowl and winning it. But Mac, from the very first game, he beat CU in his first game as the coach of the Rams, was able to bring some life back to this program, to generate some excitement. Those 2013 and 2014 seasons are a big reason why the on-campus stadium was approved. He brought some vision and he brought some excitement back to the program, along with Jack Graham, who's a big part of that process as well. But that 2012 win over CU was just so big. Admittedly, one of the worst football games I've ever been to in terms of the quality of play. Neither of those teams were any good. The quarterback play was rough in it. It was a slugfest that CSU was able to grind out, but it was such a much needed moment for the Rams after a half decade of irrelevancy and disappointment and heartbreak. And even though they ended up starting 1-5 that year, they win the game against CU and then immediately follow it up with an FCS loss at home to North Dakota State at the peak of North Dakota State's dominance. But still, you can't lose that game at home. That CU win just did so much for bringing some excitement back to people, getting people to buy into what was being built. Obviously, there was some optimism because you had an OC who had won a couple of natties at Bama. You brought in a high-profile name. It felt like the thing was going in the right direction, but I think winning that game right off the bat just did so much for re-energizing everybody, getting people to buy in, getting some juice back into the program. They finished 3-2 down the stretch in that 2012 year as well. And then in 2013, it had kind of a sluggish start. We've talked about the Tulsa game and all those weird matchups, San Jose State, a million times, so I don't want to get too repetitive, especially for those of you that listen to the pod daily. But after starting 2-3, you go 6-2 down the stretch. What was great about that was that run both started and ended in the regular season with blowout rivalry wins. You go into Laramie, absolutely kick Wyoming's ass. And then to clinch bowl eligibility at the end of that 2013 season, you throttle Air Force at home, a bad 2-win Air Force team, but still, again, just winning those big games that had kind of eluded CSU, that was Mac's specialty. Now, I think he benefited at the time from Wyoming, CU, and Air Force all being a little bit down, especially early on in his tenure. Air Force got it going in a major way in 2014, 10-win season after winning 2 games the year before. But he found a way to win when the lights were brightest, and it's what made him so revered by CSU fans. It's what made that 2014 run so special. You win the game on the road against Boston College, one of your 3 wins against teams with winning records. Although knowing what we know now about Steve Adazio, does that take away some of the shine for that win? Just knowing how bad of a coach he is, I don't know. But I'll always think back to obviously the New Mexico Bowl, but that 2014 homecoming game against Utah State is really high up there for me with my favorite CSU memories of all time. If I had to rank the top 3 moments under McElwain, and this is highly debatable, I would say 1 is that 2014 win over CU because it kickstarted your best season of the last 2 decades. You beat them for the second time in 3 years after losing kind of a wonky game in 2013 where you scored a lot of points but couldn't get stops. It was just such a big moment right off of the bat. The 2014 win over Utah State, that'd be number 2 for me. That was the first sellout in, I think over 15 years for the Rams. It might have even been the first sellout since that Utah game. I think it was like Wyoming 2004 off the top of my head, but it was just a really special night. You have a crazy finish. You convert with the deep pass to Higgins, which sets up a game winner from Jared Roberts. The students storm the field, all of that fun stuff. The ending of the 2014 season was rough. McElwain's departure from CSU was crappy in a lot of different ways. Optically, I thought Florida handled it really poorly. They were dicks about it, to be honest. They fly in the AD, basically trying to say, we're here, we're taking your guy, there's nothing you can do about it. I credit Jack Graham for really holding them to that buyout and not, bending the knee against the bigger school who tried to come in and kind of overshadow you. And then obviously McElwain does the interview in the Utah Bowl game, and that was coming off of a really heartbreaking loss to conclude the regular season. They lose a game in the Springs where Mac had one foot out the door already, just being real. He did. And you could feel it with the preparation. You could feel it with the lack energy from the team that day. I think everybody kind of knew that the last couple of weeks in general were kind of weird. Everybody knew that he was leaving, but he hadn't really told anyone yet. There were a lot of assistant coaches on that staff that had no idea if he was actually going to stay or go or not. Everybody assumed he was going to go. He did in the end. The Rams got just beat down by Utah in the Las Vegas Bowl after losing that heartbreaker in the Springs. My poor family, man. We caravanned out to both of those matchups, drove from Kansas to the Springs. I think that was Black Friday for that game, the morning of, to experience that game. They got stuck in crazy I-25 traffic going home. And then we drove out to Vegas for the Vegas Bowl as well. Got caught in a snowstorm coming back. I think it was like a 19-hour drive. Really just a nightmare end to the 2014 season altogether. But it was a fun ride there for a while. And I know it's really easy to float the hypotheticals. What if he had stayed? Having been around the program, knowing McElwain a little bit, he was never in it to stay. He had his eyes set on the SEC and bigger pastures from the minute that he came in here, and he did what he set out to. Now, was the program better off for him having come to CSU? Without a doubt. And nobody, and I mean nobody, is going to turn down that Florida gig at that time. You can't blame him at all. Admittedly, even knowing that he never would have been in it for the long run, I do think if he could have just stayed one more season, that 2015 campaign goes a lot differently. If you remember back, they started the year with overtime losses to CU and Minnesota, both really sloppy games. Just the type of games that the Rams really didn't have under McElwain, especially in 2014 and the second half of 2013. Really bad vibes from the beginning. You end up winning 7 games that year, but I think it's probably a 9 or a 10 win season if Mac is back. D Hart probably comes back. There's just a lot of things that could have been different because that team had a lot of veterans and they somewhat underperformed in 2015. Mac was not a tremendous recruiter, and I do feel like you would have felt that as the years went on. I don't think he would have been this Sonny Lubick type coach that would have had a decade of dominance. I just don't. Personally, I think he was a great coach. I think he was exactly what CSU needed at that time. I think he's a great X's and O's guy, and he came into CSU at the perfect time, took advantage of a team that had talent. Fairchild had an eye for talent as an NFL guy. He didn't run his program right. He didn't develop guys well enough. They only gave reps to the 1s and 2s. McElwain comes in with his vets, does a great job, and is able to turn the thing around. But I do wonder, there will always be a part of me that thinks back, what if he had stayed for 2015? Would that have been enough momentum for CSU to potentially get into the Big 12 when they were exploring expansion around 2016, and then CSU kind of lost their juice from there? It's easy to float the hypotheticals. I just think it lacks the important context, which is that he never wanted to be here long term. He had zero desire to be at CSU. It was just a stepping stone for him, and that's fine. They were better off for him having been here. And in the end, even though you can't blame him for taking that Florida gig, he learned the hard way that the grass is not always greener. But it's just one of those where I think we both romanticize and maybe give him a little bit too much credit in terms of the wins that he had. A lot of them were not over good teams. A lot of those rivalry wins were against the teams when they're down. But that's my whole point with this year. Why are we trying to poke holes in this schedule and act like it's not fun to be on a 5-game winning streak? They're playing the schedule that's ahead of them. It's just been a lot of really dumb, disingenuous arguments online, especially and weirdly coming from teams that CSU beat this season. I've seen a lot of New Mexico fans chirping, Nevada fans, Wyoming fans chirping that CSU is not a quality team. They didn't play a quality schedule. Well, they kicked your school's ass. So what does that say about your programs? I do understand that UNLV has a little bit of a gripe. They did get a shot at Boise. I think that's a fair argument too. Again, you can only play the schedule that's ahead of you. You have those opportunities. You either take advantage of them or you don't. To CSU's credit, to this point, they are taking advantage of those opportunities. And if they make the Mountain West title game, anything's possible. I'm not apologizing for it. Did we know that it was a favorable schedule coming in? Yeah, we've been talking about it since July. It's not our fault some of these guys were not paying attention. It's funny to me to see how these debates work out, and the college football playoff has only made the process that much dumber. Shout out to Taylor in the Toyota chat with the win. Norvell would tie Steve Fairchild as the 11th most wins among CSU coaches, and he would do it, before the end of year 3. He got a full 5 years in Fort Collins. Kyle says, I heard Mac did inquire about CSU after Adazio was like, oh, I heard that as well. I think there was legitimate interest on McElwain returning to CSU. I think he would have done it if the job was offered to him. I think he would have came back in a heartbeat. It's just a better gig, better institutional support, and a better conference, better future, you name it. I mean, CSU is significantly better than Central Michigan, but McElwain burned far too many bridges on his way out. He basically left with both middle fingers in the air and mooning Ram fans in the process. There's just far too many hurt feelings, especially with some of the important people, donors and whatnot. It was never going to happen, but I too heard that there was some interest there. And I think CSU made the right call. I think bringing Mac back would have been short-sighted. And for a lot of the reasons I've talked about, especially when it comes to recruiting and relating to players, I think the game has changed a lot in 2014 versus 2024. I'm not sure Mac's in-your-face style would work quite as well with some of these younger kids these days, but obviously we'll always look back on that time fondly as a whole. He was so important for CSU getting back to relevancy, and me individually, I'll always be thankful for the experiences that I had with him. And even if it did rub me the wrong way, he ultimately left. I think he could have handled that better. I don't blame the guy for pursuing an SEC opportunity where he ultimately went to back-to-back SEC title games and basically got ousted for not getting along well with the donors and wanting to recruit and all that. Again, he didn't love that element of the game, but dude was a winner. It was a lot of fun to have him when he was here, and I'll always be thankful for that time because I don't think I'd be here where I am today without it. Just so many connections that I have. Again, the knowledge that I obtained while working for the program. I still have a million things to learn about this game. You can never stop learning about football and be completely consumed by it for the rest of your life and always be able to keep learning. But it was just so funny. It was so humbling. I thought I knew football when I came into college. I thought I was this big hot shot. I didn't know anything. And I found that out very quickly. And I'll just always be thankful for that experience. All right, we're going to move on. We're going to get into the CSU-Fresno matchup. I'm going to lay out the history. Going to talk about a weird year for the 2024 team for Fresno State. Real quick, though, I do want to shout out our partners. Specifically, I want to talk to you guys about Coors Light. Got my Coors Light sweatshirt on. Nice little Carhartt crew neck that they hooked us up with. See the pit stains? Nice. Coors Light encourages you to choose chill. Life is all about choosing a chill mindset. Sometimes it's easy to get worked up with everything that gets thrown our way between work, between chaos. I'm having car problems this week. It just, when it rains, it pours. But it's one of those where I got to be really conscious of what I'm doing each and every day. I'm trying to constantly put myself in that chill state of mind. Then, once I'm relaxed, once I'm kicked back, once I've put things into perspective, might crack open an ice cold Coors Light when the mountains turn blue. It's as cold as the Rockies. Cold lagered, cold filtered, and cold packaged for a smooth finish. Make the most out of the times you choose to chill and choose Coors Light. Get Coors Light delivered straight to your door with Instacart by going to CoorsLight.com/DNVR. Celebrate responsibly. Coors Brewing Company, Golden, Colorado. I also want to shout out Game Time. Game Time is making it easier than ever to get tickets to your favorite events. They've got sports, they've got comedy, they've got theater, you name it, they've got it. And with their awesome new feature, Game Time Picks, it just makes that process a little bit more convenient. What Game Time Picks does, it filters out the fluff to show you only the best of the best, the premium deals, the premium seats, the best option for you. And when you're buying tickets last minute, that can be really convenient. You might be standing outside the stadium trying to figure it out. Game Time, instead of making you sort through thousands of tickets, which they have, they've got an incredible selection, will make that process easier for you with that nice little curation feature. With the Game Time guarantee, you know you're getting the best price possible. They have the most flexible customer service policy in the ticketing industry. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, use that code DNVR for $20 off your first purchase. Terms to apply. Again, create an account, redeem that code DNVR for $20 off. Download Game Time today. What time is it? Game time. All right, I'm going to answer this question from Kyle Griffin here before we move on. It was just the very public way McElwain left, and he sort of ghosted a lot of his staff players and donors to move on. That's what I mean. I don't want to get too into the weeds here and start really rambling about some of the things that were handled poorly. But I thought the worst thing that McElwain did was not doing right by the people that helped him build up the program in the first place. Parker wants to know, newer fan and alum here, what did Mac do when he was leaving that left us with a sour taste? Just basically very publicly, the Florida AD came in, flew into Fort Collins, very publicly wanted it to be known that we're here, we're taking your coach. It was this whole dramatic thing with like the local news camping out in Mac's yard trying to get like photos of him talking to Jeremy Foley, I believe his name was, the Florida AD. Again, it's just kind of how he handled the process. He was very unthankful for his time here. He did an interview during the bowl game, CSU's bowl game, at halftime, trying to promote his new program while, basically ignoring the fact that he left CSU high and dry as part of the business. And admittedly, I think it's one of those, you can't really blame him. It rubbed Ram fans the wrong way. And that's how it's always going to be. If you get broken up with, there's always going to be one side that's a little bit more upset than the other. And, I don't know. He could have handled it a little bit more gracefully. I also don't fault him that much in the end. I guess that's what it comes down to. All right, let's get into the CSU Fresno State history. I could probably talk about Jim McElwain for an entire show if I wanted to. But I think we probably basically hit the nail on the head at this point. The Rams lead the series 10-6 all time. They've won 3 of the last 4, 6 of the last 8. Historically, this game tends to be a one-score game or a blowout. Both ways. When you look at it, either a thriller that came down to the very end there, and there were a lot of good games in the mid to late 90s, early 2000s. People forget Fresno State was a thorn in the side for both CSU and CU in the early 2000s. Beat some really good Rams teams between 1999 and 2002. They won 3 straight. I mean, those are Rams teams that I believe all won a minimum of 7 games, some double-digit win teams in there. That they really hurt CSU and in some of those years, and then kind of maybe even held them back from getting a BCS type bowl, because some of those teams are really, really good. Fresno won the first ever matchup. That was only in 1992, so not a ton of history between these two schools. They won that one 52-21. After that, CSU won back-to-back 2-point games and then a couple of blowouts. Again, tends to be a blowout or a really tight game, historically speaking, at least. 6-2 over the last 8. Funny enough, 4 of the wins have come in Fresno State. This will be the 4th time in the last 5 matchups that CSU and Fresno have played with the game being in Fresno. Just kind of a weird product of some scheduling quirks between the pandemic, changing formats, eliminating divisions, just some weird things that have worked out that way. 2020 is the only time they've played outside of 2019 where the Rams won under Mike Bobo. There have been some times in the last 15, 20 years where CSU has needed to go out on the road and pull off the win. I'll always think back to that year one under Bobo, where they won 4 straight to clinch bowl eligibility, including a nice little road win against Fresno State, where I think that was the Hansley game where he had a couple of return kicks for scores. Even 2019, they started 1-5, but then they won 3 or 4 straight and got to 4-5, and that included a road win over Fresno State where Patrick O'Brien played really well. Trey McBride, that was kind of one of his breakout games. He had a touchdown catch where he caught the ball over the middle and then got up the sideline, managed to score on the play, showing off some of that athleticism that he now shows off for the Arizona Cardinals every weekend. Really, the most important games in the series history were the late 90s, early 2000s type matchup. I will say CSU's beatdown of Fresno was 2016, 37-0 in Hughes Stadium, is about as one-sided of an ass whooping as I can remember CSU handing any league opponent over the years. It was a warm day, and man, they just throttled them. It was weird. Fresno, over the last 10 to 15 years, has just been a 9 to 10 win team, or basically awful. Not a ton of in between. This year is maybe the one exception where you see they have talent. They're frisky. They've got a couple of good wins. Nevada on the road, San Jose State, they beat pretty handedly. Michigan's not a terrible loss or anything. They played a competitive game in the Big House. Even with Michigan being down, that's still a respectable performance. They also have some really weird moments. They got absolutely throttled by Air Force on the road last week, just had no desire to play in a cold game in the Springs. Really got their butts whooped by a Fresno team that had nothing to play for, while Fresno, on the other hand, has got everything to play for. They're now 5-5 after losing to Air Force and Hawaii at home. And then Hawaii goes on the road and gets just throttled by Utah State. Fresno is one of those teams, much like Utah State and Hawaii, that I feel like I've had a bit of a tough time getting a read on, because they get throttled by UNLV, then they lose a game they could have won against Washington State, and you think, man, they're in the tank, their season's done, put a fork in them. And then they respond. They win a nice game on the road against Nevada while Nevada was still frisky and in it at that point, before the injuries had started to add up and really took them out of the mix there. They really handled San Jose State fine, and as we've seen, San Jose State's been a competitive team. I think they benefited from an earlier schedule, or a easier schedule early in the season, where CSU, they're benefiting from an easier schedule late in the season after playing a really challenging schedule up front. That's the other funny thing about all these dumb arguments when it comes to CSU and their validity. If you look at the ESPN strength of schedule rankings, CSU has the highest. Now, it's because of who they played in the non-conference slate, Texas and CU, who both might be playoff teams. Their other loss is a double overtime loss on the road to Oregon State. Now, in hindsight, that loss doesn't look quite as great. It's just been funny to see some of these silly arguments. Getting back on track, Fresno State, like I said, kind of a weird year, 5-5. If they lose this one, you're sitting there at 5-6 with a road trip to UCLA. UCLA is not great. I could see them going in and winning that game, but if they lose this one, that'd be 3 in a row, 3 straight Mountain West losses going on the road. At that point, does the team just kind of fold? You don't know. This is a really interesting opportunity. You've got two teams really trending the opposite direction. CSU riding that 5-game winning streak, feeling good. Fresno State trying to get back to their winning ways, I guess. I mean, they've won 9 or more games in 3 straight years, had a couple of 10-win seasons in there. What's been understandable, because they've had some injuries, but surprising to me, especially of late, they have gotten worse at running the football as the season has progressed. Now, injuries are a part of that. Again, I get it. Malik Sherrod, he was a preseason all-conference pick in the backfield, only ended up playing 4 games. That's going to hurt your cause. And they've Elijah Gilliam, he's had some success there. He's been solid with Sherrod hurt, but there are levels to this. They only have 33 carries for 14 total yards over the last 2 weeks. 33 carries for 14 total rushing yards over the last 2 weeks. Meanwhile, they've given up 446 on the ground in those 2 losses. 344 of them came in one game against Air Force. But the week before that, you gave up 100 yards on the ground to Hawaii and also got torched for almost 300 yards and 3 scores through the air. So defensively, they've been a bit of a mess here. Offensively, they're not sustaining drives, which has been a big factor for them. I think very similarly to what you've seen from CSU and a lot of their matchups of late, you're going to see an emphasis to run the ball by the Rams. You want to play ball control. You want to, limit how many opportunities they have offensively. And if you can get off the field, if you can have success early on in downs and get off the field on third down, like you have been able to do really well throughout this 5-game winning streak, I really like CSU's chances of pulling this one out. I'm not shocked that they're underdogs on the road, just because more or less give a home team a couple of points. To me, that says Vegas views them as right about even, and I think that's fair based on what these two teams have accomplished to this point. But from an eye test standpoint, I do feel like the Rams are getting Fresno State at the right time. They've just looked out of sorts. The passing offense has not made a leap this year the way that we thought. There were a lot of veterans that had pretty statistically impressive seasons last year that maybe aren't having the type of year we expected in the Mountain West this year. BFN, it's due to scheme change. Braden Shager, I thought he would have a bigger year. Keen, he's had some turnover issues at times. He is a 70% passer, though, which leads the Mountain West. He's probably going to flirt with about 3,000 yards. He's got some arm talent. He's a guy that can improvise, buy some time. He's not really looking to run the same way that Dampier and Brendan Lewis and some of those types of quarterbacks are. He's more in the BFN school of mobility, if not even less so. I think BFN moves better than he does and has a better arm. But he is a guy that has made some big time throws. He's stepped up in some big moments for them. You definitely have to respect him. They've got talent at receiver, Magdalena and Jalen Moss. They're not big guys. I think, 5'10" and 6 foot wide receivers, smaller, more type slot guys. It's not like Devontae Adams out there, but they're dangerous in open space. They like to get the ball to them really quickly, like near the line of scrimmage and stuff like that. You got to look out for them. I already mentioned Gilliam in the backfield. Their front seven defensively, they've got some talent there. Devo Bridges at defensive end is solid, P4 transfer. They've got good linebackers. Cam Lockridge at corner is really solid. He's got 5 interceptions this year. But it's been weird to see this team, and they're hard to get a read on. I think getting off to a hot start, much like you did against Nevada, much like you did against Wyoming, I think you go up, 10-14-0 against this team early on, they might just roll over because it's been that type of year for them. I would sure be nice to see CSU really bury a team if they got into that opportunity, because I really don't think they have yet. They've left some meat on the bones in just about every one of these games. I think back to last week, you leave at least 13 points on the board between the red zone fumble and a couple of missed field goals. Similar situations against San Jose State and New Mexico. Like, it would be nice to see this team really put some points on the board, and we're going to talk about that here in just a second. I'm going to play some clips of Jay Norvell, but they're going to need their veterans to step up, and I think being healthy would be a big factor for the Rams. They're hoping to get some of these guys back. We're actually going to play a video here of Jay Norvell talking about the injury situation for the Rams, kind of give some insight into Jack Howell, who's expected to be back this week. Hopefully they're able to get Dom Jones back. I thought he was phenomenal against Wyoming. His physicality at corner has really set the tone. This defense as a whole is playing really fundamentally sound, but you want to be able to rely on some of these key pieces like Jack Howell, like Jacob Gardner. What's encouraging is it sounds like a lot of these guys should be in line to play this weekend. So here's Jay Norvell giving the latest on the injury situation for the Rams.
No. Obviously, with that in mind, this time of year get dinged up a little bit. How are you guys doing health-wise with some of the guys?
We're like everybody else. We're not 100% by any means. We're starting to get some guys back. I think, Jack's starting to get back out there, and I'm hoping Dom Jones is going to be okay. We've got a lot of guys that have played a lot of physical games, and it takes its toll this time of year. But I think we should get guys back by Saturday. I always tell guys, we don't play till Saturday, so it's Wednesday right now, and so they still got a few days to heal up.
Are you hoping Jacob will be able to?
I am. He's been amazing as he's been so durable as a player, and it's just hard to play as many games as he has and stay healthy, and so it's catching up with him a little bit, but I think he'll be okay to play.
Does it make practice for a guy like Trevin really important
yes.
to be ready?
And
get all those reps.
That's the silver lining. When a kid gets hurt or banged up and he can't practice, well, then his backup gets a lot of reps and he gains experience. And so Trevin's gotten quite a few reps in the last month, and his confidence is much higher, and so it should help him if he has to play a lot of snaps.
Are you hopeful those guys can play?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
I am. And I mean, those guys have been great. They've, and all those guys are veteran players that have played a lot of games for us. And, I tell them, it's like I told Tori, you don't have to prove anything to me, and, the old saying is if you can protect yourself, you can play. But if you can't, then you shouldn't.
All right, that's Norvell talking about the injury situation. Hopefully you're able to lean on some of those vets. Trevin Heil played admirably in a couple of games here in relief duty of Jacob Gardner, but having your center out there is just so big, making out the calls and all that, just from a communication standpoint. I think him being out there and running the ball effectively, I do feel like Gardner's absence has been felt at times in the interior when they've had to run the football without him. They haven't been able to get as much traction, particularly in some of those third and short type situations. And I think that's a big key for CSU. I've got Brett asking me in the Toyota chat, how does the weather in Fresno affect the game plan? Sounds like there might be some rain. To me, that plays into CSU's favor. I did not feel like Fresno looked like they were up for the fight in some weather. It was just kind of cold and a little bit snowy in the springs. I didn't think they looked up for it at all in that matchup. And CSU with a physical identity, it shouldn't change a ton from what you're trying to do. Now, it might make it a little bit more challenging to stretch the field vertically, catch the ball, that type of things. And I would like to see CSU show a little bit more balance at times. I think that would be big for them finally stepping on the throat of an opponent and really putting together a complete win for 60 minutes where you don't feel like you left anything on the table there. I think they're starting to make major strides in that direction. I thought Braden Fowler-Nicolosi played the best game of his career against Wyoming, looked really comfortable in the pocket, did a good job of extending the play at times, buying some time, scrambled when he needed to, but mostly was looking to throw the ball downfield. The vertical shots were gorgeous. He had the 37-yard shot down the sideline to Caleb Goody. Also had the 53-yard passing touchdown to Tommy Maher. Both of those perfectly placed footballs. Can't throw the ball any better than that. I thought the comeback to Jordan Ross it was like 3rd and 8 in that second quarter was particularly important. It was a play where BFN bought some time, gave Ross an opportunity to fight back to him. Good route running, showing some growth from a young receiver there. Great ball placement from the quarterback. I really feel like Braden has adjusted well to this new offensive scheme. I understand it's not quite as flashy as what he anticipated, what any of us anticipated, but I do feel like the Rams have discovered a winning formula here. And again, he's going to need to run a lot of these concepts. You want to be an NFL quarterback. What CSU is doing right now is going to translate to what he's going to be asked to do at the next level. They are running very NFL-esque schemes on both sides of the ball right now, winning games much like NFL teams do. Playing quality defense, tackling in the open field, winning on third down, special teams, running the ball and stopping the run. We try and make this game super complicated, and it really isn't. I do think there are some style points that CSU has maybe missed out on in a couple of these victories, and it would be nice to see them put together one of those where you just throttle someone. I think that would give some of the folks who are maybe still feeling a little bit of skepticism some confidence and get them to buy in even more so. I do think it's a fair argument that the Rams aren't beating the best teams or anything like that, but that's not in their control. All you can do is control what's ahead of you. And right now, if you win 2 games, you're in the Mountain West Championship, and you're not going to apologize. I would like to see some of these receivers continue to get in the mix. Caleb Goody had a couple of explosive plays. The more opportunities you can get for a guy like him, it can be game breaking. It takes one touch for him to completely break a game open, whether that's vertically over the top, whether it's some of the jet motion stuff near the line of scrimmage, crossers, whatever. I mean, any way you can get the ball in his hands. Guys like Armani Winfield, too, they're just so quick. They're so dangerous. You do want to be careful, though. You want to win the turnover margin, and I think that's going to be a major factor in this game. When you look at Fresno, they were +3 in their win over San Jose State. They were +3 as well in the wins over New Mexico and New Mexico State, so +9 total between those 3 wins. They were -4 in that blowout loss to UNLV. They were -1 against Michigan, and they were -1 against Air Force last week. Haven't had a ton of turnovers of late, haven't forced a lot of turnovers either. Some of the starker differences in turnover margin were earlier in the season. But I do think if you can create a couple, again, getting off to a fast start, if you can, get a pick six or something like that, I just do think it would be so big from a momentum standpoint. Parker wants to know who the biggest threats on Fresno are. I mean, outside of Mikey Keene, the QB, I mean, technically their best player is probably Mose Vavo, their guard, but that's not really somebody you're going to highlight during this type of stuff. Malik Sherrod in the backfield is very dangerous. They lost him, though. It's the skill guys. They've got speed at receiver, and they can get after the quarterback a little bit defensively. I do like that front seven. But, I mean, there's not a ton of name brand recognition on this Fresno State team. They've lost some of those key contributors they had the last couple of years. I'm trying to think. Jalen Cropper, at wide receiver. They had a solid stretch there with a couple of really good running backs. But I don't think there's a ton of names on paper that terrify you. It's more just the brand recognition and respect for a program that's been there and done that before. They had a lot of continuity on both sides of the ball, very similarly to Wyoming. It's been a weird year for them, but when you lose your head coach unexpectedly in the summer before the season, that's going to happen. Tim Skipper's my guy. I've got so much love for him. I'm so thankful for everything he did for me while he was at CSU. He's unfortunately having a rough year. He's not going to get that job full time. I hope they at least keep him on the staff in some capacity with whoever they bring in there, because he's a Fresno State alum. Has worked on multiple staffs now. He's been there for the program in times of need. This is the second time he stepped up as the interim head coach with Tedford, having to deal with some medical issues. But they're a program that's kind of trending in the wrong direction, but you've still got to respect them just because of the experience that they have. CSU does seem very locked in, though. I agree with what Taylor says in the Toyota chat. The players seem so focused on winning, whether that be Monday, Thursday, Saturday. I'm feeling good about where their heads are at. I do feel like the guys have had the right mindset, and there's been a lot of talk, both from the players and the staff, about having even bigger goals. Beating Wyoming and Air Force, that was a goal. That was something you needed to check off, but they want to accomplish things that are even bigger than that. You have an opportunity here to have a 9-win regular season. That's not something you scoff at or take for granted. They have an opportunity here to play their way into the Mountain West Championship for the first time ever. That's big time. It's all about how CSU responds, though. I do feel like they're the better team. If they play their game on both sides of the ball, they should come out of this game victorious. But, turnovers, not being able to get off the field, that's the great equalizer in a matchup like this. And I think you got to start quick, because I do think that has been massive for the Rams. It just plays right into your hand. If you can hit on some of those big offensive plays early, establish the lead, then you can really wear on a team and lean into that ground game and, run possession and shorten the matchup and all of that. Because at the end of the day, while I would love to see, a throttling, all I really care about is, are you getting the dub? And they have been getting the dub far more frequently than they have not of late. I'm going to play another video here of Jay Norvell kind of talking about Caleb Goody, the importance of getting him the ball, and some of these skill guys. And then we'll get out of here. I'll answer if you guys have any more questions, comments, concerns, any of that. I'll give a couple of final thoughts. But here's one more video from Jay Norvell after practice yesterday, talking about Caleb Goody and some of the explosive skill guys.
We're growing with our personnel, I think, every week. And the more we practice with our guys, we use practice as an experiment. So we're always experiment with different guys, seeing what they can do, and auditioning guys in practice. And so whenever we see a guy that has a talent for something, we try to utilize it in the game. And we don't always get it in at once, but as the season goes on, it gives you opportunities to put guys in position. And yeah, Caleb's an explosive guy. I think our receiving group is starting to emerge, and some of their talents are starting to show more. And so he's a fun guy to make plays for because he's super explosive.
Because he's a guy with 4 straight games now where he's had at least one explosive play for you.
Yep, and that's important. You know, we have to utilize the skills of all the players that can give us explosives, and Caleb's definitely one of those guys.
Exciting future for Caleb Goody. I think he is going to be one of the most important pieces to retain this offseason. That's the tough part about the transfer portal and the NIL era is after guys start to pop for you, you've got to be able to keep them in your program. His ceiling is very high as a player. One of the fastest receivers I've ever seen. Evan wants to know, is BFN the guaranteed starter for future seasons? If he sticks around, I would assume so. I don't think there's any guarantees in the portal era. I think much like last year, there will be interest in him from bigger schools if he chooses to pursue that. That's up to him. I do know that this is not what he envisioned when he came here schematically. Certainly thought he was going to get more opportunities to throw the ball. That could be a factor. I can't speak for him. I don't know. I would hope that he would be able to recognize the growth he's had in this system, understand that, well, maybe it's not what he anticipated. It's working. I thought his performance in this game this past weekend, despite not even having, 25 pass attempts, I thought he looked like an NFL quarterback. To me, what he showed in that win over Wyoming would be more impressive to NFL scouts than throwing the ball 55 times and racking up 350 yards, but a lot of it's probably coming on quick screens and stuff near the line of scrimmage where it's essentially an extension of the run game. And it's kind of, I don't want to say exaggerating the stats. I think what they're doing right now is indicative of a winning football team at any level. Like, this is what you need to do. You've got to have success in the trenches. You've got to limit the self-inflicted wounds. The Rams have done such a better job of not being heavily penalized and not having these multi-turnover games and creating some turnovers and havoc the other way. Like, they are doing the little things. But BFN also has just really grown. He looks so much more comfortable out there. When he's called to make those big throws, he's really been accurate. I think his decision-making has been big. I think he's grown so much out there. Parker wants to know thoughts on our bowl projections. You win one more, I think you should basically be out of that Potato Bowl range, which would be great. The LA Bowl would be a lot of fun because you'd probably get a premium opportunity. The Arizona Bowl or the New Mexico Bowl, also both great options because they're easy to travel, fun opportunities for the fans to attend the games. I think it's fun. I think they're in a really good spot, and I'm interested to see kind of how this all shakes out. Obviously, what happens with who ends up winning the league and the college football playoff rankings and all that, those will play a factor into it. I do think CSU should probably be rooting for San Jose State against UNLV on Friday night. I think they should be rooting for Wyoming against Boise State as well. There is a world in which CSU could host the conference title game. They're just going to need a little bit of help. There's also a world in which they can clinch a spot in the title game. If they win this weekend and UNLV loses, the Rams are going to be in the title game, regardless of what happens against Utah State. Regular Dad Bod wants to know thoughts on whether Boise is overutilizing Genty in pursuit of the Heisman. That's such a tough balance because you want to reward him for coming back. And a large part of him coming back was having this Heisman campaign. I also think that's their best offense is getting the ball in Gianti's hands. Maddox-Madsen, pretty pedestrian as a passer. He's doing a great job of managing the game, making good decisions, not costing them, but he does not terrify you from an arm talent standpoint. And so I understand that. I do think that GNT is wearing down a little bit, and that's just natural. The dude is getting a ton of carries, and that could be a factor come Mountain West Championship game. How healthy is he if he has 60 more carries these next 2 weeks? And how they approach that is going to be very interesting to me. I don't think you can abandon it because I think you've got to do right by him, and coaches, they're just going to do that. Like if Torrey Horton was back and they were going to Fresno this weekend as a kid from Fresno, I think CSU would have done everything in their power to have him get a 200-yard game, multi-touchdowns. Like you want your guys to feel like they're being honored and you're doing right by them and all that, but competitively, it could come back to bite them in the end and could be their downfall, because when they aren't able to run the ball with that effectiveness and Madsen has to drop back there and consistently beat you as a passer, I think that gives a lot of, I think that would bode really well for CSU in a matchup against them. I think a team like UNLV could beat them as well. I mean, I don't think they're unbeatable by any means. I don't. I think they're really tough, and that stems from them winning the line of scrimmage on both sides of the ball, running the ball with effectiveness, really just not beating themselves. But if you can make them do anything else, they are susceptible for sure. Kyle wants to know, do you think CSU's defense can slow down an offense like Boise State? Yeah, I do. I don't think Genty's just going to do nothing because he's just too dang good. But yeah, I mean, I think with what the Rams are doing right now, they've been very fundamentally sound. They've had a lot of success in the trenches themselves. They've been really solid at tackling in the open field, which is, I don't remember the last time you could say that about a CSU defense. It definitely was not the case when I worked for the program and has not been the case since. I think it's the best tackling CSU team we've seen in a long time. And that's huge for a guy like Genty, who is so tremendous at creating those extra yards after contact. I have all the respect in the world for him. I said he was the best running back in the country coming into the season before everybody else was on that hype train. I was like, this is running back one on the draft pod. It's not even close. I don't understand why people are talking about Ollie Gordon and some of these other guys. Not even close. So I love the dude. I'm stoked to see him have this type of year. I think he's going to be the Mountain West Offensive Player of the Year, obviously. But yeah, I do think there's a path to CSU competing with a team like Boise State, because I think fundamentally we're pretty similar with what we're trying to accomplish. But I like CSU's quarterback and receivers a hell of a lot more. And I think the defense has been playing better. I think we have a better secondary. The O-lines are about comparable. D-line production-wise, CSU, they've been solid. I mean, really the only clear advantage they have, in my opinion, is in the backfield. And even then, CSU's got a pretty solid backfield as well, with three guys that you can depend on right now, with Morrow, Marshall, and Dupree. Hope is to have Morrow and Marshall back. Both those guys got a little bit dinged up in that win over Wyoming. That was such a physical matchup. But big opportunity ahead of the Rams. You have been able to take advantage to this point. Can you now really put a stamp on it and solidify this as one of the better years in program history? I don't care about the schedule. I don't care about any of it. You beat two rivals. You've done the job to this point. Now go out and seize the moment. Earn that spot in the conference championship. And at that point, anything is possible. You just got to get there. Go out and seize the moment. I'll be going live tomorrow morning. I'll talk more about this Fresno State matchup. We'll also talk some hoops because we've got some Friday night hoops. I'll go live post-game on Sunday morning, and I'll have an audio-only podcast sometime this weekend as well. All kinds of written content coming your way. Now's a great time to become a DNVR diehard. Get access to all my premium CSU football and CSU basketball content, as well as everything else we're doing at DNVR. Broncos, Avs, Nuggets, you name it, we're killing it. So much love to everybody in Ram Nation for continuing to support all this content. I wouldn't be here without any of you. Don't worry. The hair is still shaggy. We're still rocking with it. As long as CSU keeps winning, I am not allowed to cut it. I think that is what we have established. Getting kind of tough to contain in the hat here. Don't know what I'm going to do with the sideburns pretty soon, but I'm excited. It's fun to be in this position. It's fun to be able to hypothesize the bowl scenarios and even dream big a little bit. Is there a path to which CSU could get to the playoff? I doubt it, but I don't think it's impossible either, especially if you could get some help. I think it would greatly benefit the Rams if Tulane and Army both dropped a game, for instance. Washington State losing another game would probably benefit CSU as well. But there is a world in which it's possible, and to be able to say that at this stage of the season is just, it's pretty dang cool. And I think if I would have told you guys that, especially after the CU loss, for instance, a lot of you guys would have taken it. So I'm really interested to see how this team responds. I've been so proud of the fight that they've shown. It's been a lot of fun to have relevant games in November, and I hope you guys stick along for the whole ride. Before we get out of here, Parker wants to say, might be a draft pod question, but what teams do you see Horton and Genty fitting best? It's a great question. Genty can kind of do it all. He's a good pass catcher. Any run-heavy offense, I think, would benefit him. I could really see him thriving like in a Green Bay offense, for instance. I think he'd be good with Sean Payton. Horton, he's a guy, I think they're going to really rely on his speed at the next level. Maybe not quite as much of a 3-down threat as he was at CSU, although he does run a complete route tree. I think a team like Kansas City could use him. I think Pittsburgh, he would be a really good fit. Anywhere where you're looking to go vertical pretty often. Denver could use him at this point. Shit, that receiving core is pretty mediocre. Anyways, that's all I've got for you guys. Got all kinds of content coming your way the next couple of days. Much love, y'all. Always proud to be. Peace.
We all silly like the mayor.